implemented by the council, they probably would have sounded too dangerous. But those who shaped Gaudium et Spes, I'm sure, had read these lines from Teilhard. To worship was formerly to prefer God to things, relating them to him and sacrificing them for him. That's that spirituality of detachment. Now, he says, to worship is becoming to devote oneself, body and soul, to the creative act, associating oneself with that act in order to fulfill the world by hard work and intellectual exploration. It used to appear that there were only two attitudes mathematically possible for us, to love heaven or to love earth. With a new view of space and time, a third road is opening up to make our way to heaven through earth. In other words, there is no heaven apart from a renewed earth. And incidentally, recent New Testament scholarship would say the same thing. The decisive argument that will convince the world of the reality of our God will be the demonstration of the conjunction, that is the bringing together of the two attractions, the heavenly, the vertical, and the earthly, the horizontal, realized in a life that is fully human because fully Christian. So then to come back to the main problem that I'm trying to talk about here, the problem, how then do you reconcile the spiritual fervor of the classic hierarchical view, which many people still follow exclusively, and the new horizontalized picture of a cosmos 13.8 billion years old, but still unfinished, so that those 30 volumes that I showed might turn out in the final analysis to be only the dawn of this process of becoming. Now we have to realize that. And for Teilhard, something big throughout cosmic history has always been taking shape up ahead. And if you go back to, say, the early universe, say 100,000 years after the universe was came into existence through the Big Bang, and looked out at this sea of plasma and perhaps eventually hydrogen atoms and helium atoms, how many of us would have, at that time, if we had been present there and looked out at this, have predicted that eventually out of this would come molecules, cells, organisms, beings endowed with consciousness and capacity to love and keep promises. Something big has always been taking shape up ahead. So now, why should we assume that the process is anywhere near the end? What we should be asking is now taking shape up ahead. So to resolve the conflict between the two vectors, is all you have to do is move the religious furniture in your mind around just a little bit. Instead of thinking of God solely as up there, drawing us to withdraw from the world, instead of thinking of the hereafter only as harvesting the earth and leaving it to just pointlessness, think of God as drawing the whole universe into the future. And this is the biblical God. Teilhard was clear on this, that the God of Abraham is a God who calls Abraham and his people into a new future. So what Teilhard is, in a sense, asking us, and I think it's worth thinking about this if you're from a Christian tradition, not only think of God as drawing Abraham, Israel, the people of God, the church, or even the totality of humanity, or even just the earth, but think of God as drawing the whole universe into the future. That would be the ultimate theological explanation of evolution, and it would not in any way conflict with what science is telling us. So think of God in that fashion, as more as up ahead than as up above. And then think of the hierarchy, which was originally static and vertical, as an emergent one, in which matter appears first, and then in this drama is followed by life, and then by mind, and then by what Teilhard calls the world of spirit. By spirit, he doesn't mean God. He means what human culture, what the human mind through culture has brought about, including science, morality, and so forth. This is also part of the cosmic process. How much time do I have?
Maybe another 10 minutes.
10 minutes?
And then
we have some questions. Okay, I'll take 5 or 10 more minutes. Okay. And that gives the hierarchy a kind of dramatic value that the static vertical one did not have. The cosmos is a drama. The cosmos, we now realize, is a story. Teilhard was one of the first scientists in the 20th century to have realized that the universe is a story. This idea is so new to us that neither scientists nor theologians nor philosophers have really yet thought much in depth about it. But one of the things that's implied by the very fact of story, as we know from anthropology and other sciences that have studied human beings as a storytelling animal, it's primarily through stories that humans get a sense of meaning. Stories, in other words, or dramas, can be the carrier of a meaning in ways that static structure, static design is not able to do. So this gives a kind of climactic value to what were formerly the higher levels in the hierarchy, but which are now latest emergent stages in a process of ongoing creation, the cosmic process. And here's how Teilhard wants us to think about God. Instead of thinking about God as suspending everything from above, holding it into existence from above, or instead of thinking with materialist science as everything is based upon a series of causal and effect relationships that go back into the misty past, instead of thinking of the world resting on either the eternal present or the physical past, think of the universe. And this is a very biblical way of looking at things. Catholics have not always been very attentive to the Bible, as we all know. Think of God as the future, and think of the world as resting on the future as its sole support. After the Second Vatican Council, Karl Rahner, one of the most important Catholic theologians in the 20th century, started talking about God as the absolute future. A wonderful turn in theological thinking. In many ways, it's a turn back to the biblical way of understanding God. So to come back to my question then, is there anything in present cosmology that can function any way comparably to the way in which the fixed crystalline spheres functioned for pre-Copernican religious people? My suggestion, and I think Teilhard's too, is that the new cosmology gives us a new horizon for the lifting up of hearts, the future, the realm of always new possibilities that we can always trust in. And this trust is the basis of hope, and hope can be therefore the basis of vigorous moral action. Instead of thinking with the intelligent design people of the cosmos as a kind of museum display of exquisite design, think of the cosmos from its very inception as pregnant with promise. When we talk about the Word of God hovering over the waters in the beginning and bringing creation into being, think of that word in a biblical sense. In the biblical sense, the term word, the Word of God, always has, I believe, overtones of promise, of opening up the future. This is what a promise is, something that opens up the future. And the biblical stories, of course, time after time, tell us about people reaching dead ends and finding that on the other side of those brick walls and dead ends, new possibilities remain. So the idea of a world created by the Word, through the Word, could be understood as a world that's created from the beginning within the context of promise, of anticipation, of new possibilities up ahead. So the cosmos then is a still unfolding drama. I'm running out of time, so I want to say just a word or two in conclusion about how Teilhard understands the role of Christ, talking about the Word, Christ, the incarnate Word. Where does Christ come into this new picture of hope and of vigorous practice of virtue in a new sense with a new horizon? I'll just end with some quotations. God, Teilhard says, did not will individually the sun, the earth, plants, or even humanity. First, God willed his Christ. In the beginning was the Word. That was the vision within which creation takes place. And in order to have his Christ, God had to create the spiritual world and humanity in particular, upon which Christ might germinate. And to have humanity, God had to launch the vast process of organic life. And the birth of that organic life called for, as required, as a condition for its being, called for the entire cosmic turbulence, the whole kind of Big Bang cosmology, which Teilhard was starting to become conscious of in his own last years. The prodigious expanses of time which preceded the first Christmas were not empty of Christ. They were imbued with the influx of his power. It was the ferment of his conception that stirred up the cosmic masses and directed the initial developments of the biosphere. It was the travail, that is the struggle, preceding his birth that accelerated the development of instinct and the birth of thought upon the earth. The fearful anonymous labors of primitive man, the beauty fashioned through its age-long history by ancient Egypt, the anxious expectancies of Israel, the endless refining of wisdom by the Greeks, all these were needed before the flower could blossom on the rod of Jesse and of all humanity. All these preparatory processes were cosmically and biologically necessary that Christ might set foot upon our human stage. And all this labor was set in motion by the active, creative awakening of his soul, inasmuch as that human soul had been chosen to breathe life into the universe. When Christ first appeared before men in the arms of Mary, he had already stirred up the world. Much more to be said, but thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor Hart, and we can take a few questions. We have about 10 minutes.
If no one has a question, then I have a question. This question in my mind for a long time is God create universe is so big. I think the distance one planet to another planet can go billions light year. So it's so big, but you know, the life now we know only on the earth. And Earth is so small part of the universe. And it's just one of the